Russia is the world's largest country and it has much to show for it. However, the country bears some of the most treacherous terrain and coldest weather on Earth. Moscow and St. Petersburg, Russia's two largest cities, lie in the populated west of Russia, whereas the rest of the country to the east, known as Siberia, bears a wide range of terrain and weather that make it difficult for large population centers to exist there. Perhaps Russia's most defining landmark is Siberia. The book, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, takes place in Siberia. Other than the huge monuments dedicated to soldiers of World War II, other landmarks include the gulags. Important historical events play a key role in understanding the background to the book. After Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin assumed the role as leader of the Soviet Union. He instituted several economic policies, including collectivization and industrialization, which concentrated all resources on building the country from bottom up. While repairing his country after World War I, he also destroyed it by purging the country of any suspected criminals that tarnished whatever the Soviet Union stood for. Millions and millions of people died from purges, famine, and labor. During World War II, Stalin used his massive Red Army to defeat Germany. In the process, he claimed all territory his military marched across. This resulted in a large tract of Eastern Europe coming under his control in what was known as the Eastern Bloc. Some historical figures include Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, and Nikita Khrushchev. Lenin laid the foundation for what the Soviet Union should have become. Stalin represented the extreme version of those ideas. And Khrushchev, intended on dismantling what Stalin brought upon the Soviet Union in a process called de-Stalinization.
Stalin, through whatever measures necessary, is always pitted against the Soviet Union against the United States. Stalin's ultimate goal was to show power through weapons development. Under his tenure, the Soviets developed a nuclear weapon to compete with weapons America had already developed. Soviet scientists under Stalin attempted to beat America in multiple fields of research and development, eventually accomplishing travel to space before the Americans. Nowadays, Stalin is credited for the successful construction of the Soviet Union, but his ruthless dictatorship does not receive much praise. The author Alexander Solzhenitsyn was successful in highlighting the brutal policies that the Soviet Union had once adopted to keep the Russian population in check.
One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich was written by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Alexander was born December 11, 1918, in Kislovodsk. Two of his most notable literary works were A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich and The Gulag Archipelago. In 1970, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature for his writing based upon the life in the Soviet Union. Alexander studied physics and mathematics, but also had a passion for literature and studied from 1939 to 1941 at the Moscow Institute of History, Philosophy, and Literature. After his time at Moscow, he became an artillery officer in the Soviet Union Army from 1942 to 1945. In 1945, he was arrested for what deemed to be negative comments he wrote in a private letter. He was charged with anti-Soviet propaganda and sentenced to 8 years in a labor camp. In 1945, he was arrested for what deemed to be negative Stalin comments written in a private letter. He was charged with anti-Soviet propaganda and sentenced to 8 years in a labor camp. A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich was based on his experience in a labor camp located in Kazakhstan. While there, he developed a cancerous tumor which required operation. Though his cancer was not completely cured, he went into remission in late 1953. Alexander was released from spending time in labor camps in 1956. Alexander then settled outside of Moscow after he was released and made a living teaching math and writing. A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich was published in 1962. Alexander was then expelled from Russia in 1974 because of his brutally honest writings of the Soviet Union. In 1944, he was allowed to return to Russia after the collapse of the USSR. Unfortunately, Alexander died August 3, 2008.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a teacher at our school. He's a famous writer and author of many works, including The Gulag Archipelago, Matryona's House, The First Circle, and The Cancer Ward. Alexander Solzhenitsyn received the Nobel Prize for Literature. During the Soviet era, he was accused of heresy. Following his rehabilitation, he worked as a physics and astronomy teacher at our school from 1957 to 1962. Solzhenitsyn came to visit us in 1994. This is a photo of him in front of this notice board. We have a signed copy of one of his books.
I cannot live without the language, and I live in the language. It's obvious. The richness of Russian words and expressions, the language's unconstrained syntax afford me intense pleasure. And so they take you away. During a daylight arrest, there's always that brief and unique moment when they take you through a crowd of hundreds of just such doomed innocent people as yourself. Well, you aren't gagged. You can and you really should cry out. Cry out that you're being arrested. On the 11th day after my arrest, 3 Smersh bums burdened by 4 suitcases full of war booty. I myself lugged a 5th suitcase with no great joy, since it contained my diaries and literary works, which were being used as evidence against me. They brought me to the Belarusian station in Moscow. Not one of the 3 knew the city, and it was up to me to pick the shortest route to prison. And now I was leading the Smershmen through the concourse of the subway station, with its brilliant electric lights, and opposite us 2 parallel escalators thickly packed with Muscovites rising from below. It seemed as though they were all looking at me. They kept coming in endless ribbons from down there, from the depths of ignorance, on and on, reaching toward me for at least one word of truth. So why did I keep silent? I kept silent for only one reason. These Muscovites thronging the steps of the escalators were not enough for me. Here my cry would be heard by 200 or twice 200. But what about 200 million?